Hello everyone, it's been a while since we have done a educational video. Today we're going to run through the esoteric meanings or meaning of death in less than 15 minutes. This is by me, Nicholas C. O'Donnell. And before we begin, I want to plug in a new book that I'm publishing at the end of the month, at the end of August, called The Sage's Cloak. Um, it's intended to be a bridge between divination and mysticism for beginners. Okay. Okay. So these are the renditions of the death card that we're going to use. We have the Versailles, Rider Waite, the BOTA Tarot, and the Crowley Tarot. So we have to look at the number 13. Okay, we have 13 on the top here. 1 plus 3 equals 4, which is formation. Okay, if we look at shapes, 4 is the first three-dimensional shape. So we also have 3 minus 1, which is 2. Thus, we have 1, 2, 3, and 4. So we can create 1 to 4 out of the number 13. And this is one of the only numbers I have really found that we can do that in the tarot. Now, that's not to say that there's other numbers out there that we can't do that with, but in the tarot, this is the one that we can do it with. If there's another one, let me know. I'd love to know. So anyway, if we add 1, 2, 3, and 4, we get 10, which is completeness. And there's the 10 spheres on the tree of life. We can also talk about the tetractys, the Pythagorean tetractys. So, it's a really important number. And it just goes to show that the number 13 has to do with divinity and divine power. So when we look at numbers esoterically, we always read them from right to left. So we have the powers of 3 addressing the 1. Okay, so 3 is the birthing principle. 3, masculine, feminine, child. Okay, man, woman, child. It's the birthing principle, and the Empress has to do with giving birth. She represents the powers of Venus, which is love, um, you know, nature, bringing things into life, physical form. So it's the birthing principle going back into the completeness of the 1, which is basically the void. To me, 0 and 1 are very similar in their powers because 0 basically represents like the emptiness of the void, and 1 is the completeness of the void. So there's like a void that is everything, and then there's a void that is nothing. So the birthing principle is going back into the completeness of everything. So it's like reversing itself, okay? Now death, we'll get into it. So Scorpio is ruled by Mars, which is the action force. I interpret it as the will. Okay, so it's like the force that drives things forward. We have Scorpio is also a water sign. So we have those contradictory forces. We have Mars, which is usually assigned to fire, and we have water, which is a very flowing element, right? It has to do with calmness, psychic ability, um, emotional interactions with things. So we have kind of like an alchemical thing going on here. I believe Scorpio is also a fixed sign of the zodiac, so it's very pure in its essence. Now, if we think about water, a wall of water is like a rushing will. Okay, there's also life has a will to express itself through water. So Mars is very fitting for Scorpio because Scorpio is said to understand the secrets of sexual reproduction. So it has 3 or 4 different animals that represent it, and this is the only sign in astrology that has more than one animal that represents it. Yeah, we could talk about like Sagittarius, which is a human, and a horse, which makes, but this is the only one that really has 3, which is the eagle or the phoenix, the scorpion, and the snake. Now, I I like the phoenix because of the constant birth and rebirth, the cycles of change that it goes through. But the eagle also makes a lot of sense if you look at it from an alchemical perspective, which is like the ascension of the transmutation of man into his highest form. So if we look at the symbol of Scorpio, it's very similar to Virgo, except the Scorpio has more of a flowing essence to it. Now, if we were to look at if you want, you can go and look at the symbol of Virgo. It folds back onto itself, which makes a lot of sense because it's an earth sign. It has to do with organization, it has to do with looking at everything. So it's more of an inverted sign. It's looking into itself to find the answer. Scorpio has to do with the powers of reproduction and releasing that power. So it's more of a flowing essence. It flows outwards. It points in a new direction because it has that Mars force behind it. So if we look at it, we can break it down. We have 2 Aries signs and then also the Mars sign with the tail here. So really it represents the flowing nature of the sex force through water. Okay. That's the quickest way that I can describe what Scorpio is. So the letter we have here is the letter Nun, which is the fish. Okay. There's a couple different interpretations for this Hebrew letter. But traditionally in the past 100 or so years, it's been assigned to the fish, which we can create connections to Pisces. And it's called the imaginative intelligence. Now, if we think about death, we can only speculate what happens afterwards. So we have to imagine what's going to happen. And also, when we actually use our imagination, we're having a disconnect. We're disconnecting from physical reality and we're looking into like that mental force that constitutes how we think, how our intellect works, how we observe the world. So when we think of imagination, we're disconnecting from what we perceived to be reality initially. And if we think about Virgo's assigned to the Hermit, which is also the number 9, which is a death in itself. It's the death of the single digit numbers. It's the ending of single digits. It's the transformation of moving into double digit numbers. Now, 9 is interesting. And if you watch my video on the Hermit, because you can create all numbers out of 9. So even though it's the end of single digits, it's the beginning of something greater. And Pisces is also the 12th zodiac sign, so there's also an ending. Okay, so let's move here. Might be 16 minutes. The powers of Venus are sent into the Christ force by the processes of death, i.e., death is the purifier of nature and the second birth. So if we look at the tree of life here, we have Netzach and Beauty. We have the powers of Venus and the powers of the sun. I like to look at the tree of life through an astrological perspective, just because I understand those forces, I think, a little bit better than traditional Kabbalistic perspective. Although the more that I get into the Kabbalah, it's just so disputed. It's almost more worth talking about the astrological signs. So death purifies physical matter by dissolution. So when something dies, it's dissolved. It's broken down. Now, if something was perfect, it wouldn't break down. It wouldn't die. So nothing is perfect. And to say one knows perfection is suspect unless they are perfect themselves. Therefore, death nullifies imperfection. So when we die, we are nullifying our sin. We're letting go of all of our past transgressions. We're basically letting the universe is letting go of that combination of matter. And then it gets recycled. So atoms are neither created nor destroyed. It's just merely recycled. So this is like the transformer, or imagining a new combination into the universe. So, on the contrary, nothingness is perfection, because as soon as something is proposed as good as bad, bias happens. So, basically, nothingness, or the void that I was talking about earlier, is perfection itself. So, the void of everythingness, because everythingness is constantly changing, it can't take a side, and the void of zero is perfection. Okay. So as long as you're incarnated in a body, there's no way to get to that state. You have got to cross the void of death. So death, Carl Jung, the transformer is above the transformed. And you can find this in Psychology and Alchemy, his book. Everything is prone to death in the physical universe except atomic matter itself, which is the completeness of the universe, which is the one. Death purifies the universe. So death is the transformer. Now, because death is the transformer, it is the void. So the transformer is above the transformed. Now, when we talk about the tarot, these are actual powers that we can find inside the universe. These keys, these cards, they represent literal universal powers. So the atoms and the body, so the atoms of the body recycle themselves, creating everlasting life and reincarnation. So if we think about it, the atoms are reincarnating, not ourselves. So death drives evolution. Because we are imperfect, we are constantly evolving through death, through all these little mini deaths, and it's pushing things forward. And we'll look at that when we get to the tarot. So once one dies, liberates one's actions from physical life, purifying sin. I have my own thoughts about reincarnation and karma. Now, if you want to contest this, great. Let's get some engagement going. But I think when one dies, it liberates one's actions from physical life. So here we go. Let's get into the fun stuff. So here we have the Marseille Tarot and the BOTA Tarot. These are probably one of the most used decks besides the Rider-Waite and the Crowley deck. Now, if we look at the Marseille Tarot, we actually can find the symbol of Saturn with the scythe and the way that the body is shaped, okay? So we actually have we actually have the symbol of Saturn holding the body in, and the scythe is liberating it back outward. Now, dissolution is sometimes assigned to this, but if we look further on into the system of the tarot, we start to see this white rose. Now, as I was saying, death is the purifier of the universe. So when we are dissolved, we are actually purified. Through death and all these small deaths of atomic matter, the universe is purifying itself. So when death happens, it's releasing that compact Saturn force that's holding everything together and then pushing it back outwards. So Saturn releases it, but Saturn also causes restriction. So if we think about it, not only is Saturn holding the body together, the powers of Saturn, but it's also liberating it at the same time. Death is really cool. All right, and then here we have up in the corner, we have the seed of life. We have the seed of life up in the left-hand corner, which constantly is rejuvenating itself through the processes of life. So if we think about it, if we delineate the patterns of evolution back into the initial cause, that is just the seed of God recycling itself over and over. So now this is the last slide. Again, we have the white rose signifying the purity that death brings. We also have this is basically on the Rider Waite deck, this is basically showing us that even time dies, even times die, and we even have the woman of the strength card bowing down here, which also is representative of the sex force, but she's not looking at death because she created death itself. Now, in the back of the Rider Waite deck, we have these two towers, which represents the evolution of man through the moon, through sleeping, through regenerating ourselves. Now, if we look at the Crowley Tarot, we have the Phoenix or the Eagle rising above, and it's showing us that recycling of matter and the souls through matter, they eventually liberate themselves through the cycles of time. So we're trying to keep this under 15 minutes. So that's all I'm going to give you guys today. I hope you enjoyed the presentation, and thank you.